Let's start with the leaflets and other resources, which are both different in look and different in how to get hold of them. If you've done Dying Matter stuff in the past, you'll know that we used to have a lot of very different leaflets. And in fact, we did a review and found that we had 15 different leaflets, some of which, to be honest, repeated each other with a different cover. So at the end of last time's Awareness Week, we were pretty much out of the stock of those, and we thought this is a good opportunity both to refresh the content of the design, but also to think about how we get them into people's hands. They're still fundamentally fine leaflets. They were looking a little bit tired. Most of them date from the early years of Dying Matter, so they're 8-9 years old, and they could do with a refresh anyway. So we thought, let's do that refresh, and also look at the content and see if we can winnow it down and keep it simpler for people, because we very much have heard people's issues around the cost and also how long it can take to get hold of the leaflet sometimes. So we've done a redesign, and now we have 6 leaflets. Which are, and you've got them on the table, it's Dying to be Heard, Things to Do Before You Die, Supporting Bereavement, Let's Talk About Dying with Children affected by dementia, and Talking About Dying with Children, which again comes up to a point that was raised just before. I'm going to go briefly through each of those and what's in the content, although for the most part it's pretty self-explanatory. But first of all, I'm going to ask for a favour, very much in keeping with our theme of Dying to be Heard. We've gone from 15 leaflets to 6 for this year, but we don't expect this to be the end of that particular process. The Dying Matter cycle never really ends, so we need to get a set of leaflets together so that we'd have stuff to talk about today and to be available for this year's Awareness Week. But already looking ahead to 2021, and Sarah's already talked about some of the plans for that, we want to hear from you, the people putting on Dying Matters events, which leaflets are useful, is the format useful, are there topics that people ask about that aren't covered by a leaflet? So please, as this year unfolds, as this Dying Matters Awareness Week comes, I mean, some of you might have ideas and thoughts already, but I'm thinking more about stuff, actually sort of, do it on the ground, meeting members of the public, handing out stuff. We want to know what works so that we can then develop, if necessary, a slight extension to this set of leaflets for 2021 and beyond, so that we really are making sure we're meeting your needs in terms of having resources that meet the public and what they're about. So is there a topic that is requested and not covered? Are any of them superfluous? Is there any particular more specific ones we might do? We can't promise to do everything you ask for, but we want to hear what's useful and what doesn't work so that we can be as effective for you as possible. So the idea, basically, this set of leaflets for this year, hopefully you'll find them very useful, but in a sense they are a bit of a holding set, and then there'll be a further development in the second half of this calendar year, which will then be able to launch in a year's time, which I'm looking forward to already. So, and also, if you do have any supplies of the old leaflets, because we know some people used to buy larger quantities and use them over several years, that's absolutely fine. The old leaflets are still fine, they work, the content is good, the phone number on the back is out of date, but apart from that, they're still absolutely fine to keep using those up, so don't worry if you do have those. As Sarah said, we've changed the colour of the logo, so bring it in line with the Hospice UK colour scheme, which means it's much easier for us to put Dying Matters and Hospice UK side by side, as you see here on the slides, because it's such an important part of Hospice UK's work. But other than that, we wanted to keep the logo as similar as possible, simply because we don't want the old stuff to be useless. It's still valid, new colour, but in fresh content. We know people spend a lot of their own money getting the leaflets in the past, and we don't want to invalidate any of the stuff you're already holding on to. So, Dying to be Heard relates to this year's theme about listening, why it's important to listen. It's got some practical advice on being a good listener. It says to people, you don't need to be an expert, but here are some tips to get you started. And if you need more information, well, guess what? There's tons of it on the Dying Matters website, and there's a link through to lots of good signposts to other partners and sources of information. Although it's tied to this year's theme, we hope it'll be a good, relevant leaflet for years to come. Things to Do Before You Die. This is a general purpose Dying Matters leaflet, and covers the asks that we've already mentioned, so wills, funerals, organ donation, future care plans, above all, writing it down, and telling people where to find this information. Good, broad general purpose thing. Let's talk about dying, which is why it's important to talk about dying. We know from the polling we've done in the past that 2/3 of people say they are comfortable talking about death. Well, great. The problem is 3/4 of people say they think other people aren't comfortable talking about death. So it's not me, it's you. So it's almost saying to people, look, go ahead, okay, it's fine. Actually, as comfortable as you feel, other people feel comfortable as well. Just don't worry about it. Supporting bereavement, really important that we are able to talk about grief. If we can't talk about death and dying, it's very hard to support people, friends, colleagues, family members who have been bereaved, who are grieving. And as someone mentioned, that grieving process can sometimes last for a very long time. We need to be able to support people throughout it, the duration of it, which is why it's important to be able to talk about dying. So we're not claiming in a single leaflet to offer all the advice that exists about grief and supporting people. But again, we've got signposts to get people started, and it's about saying it's okay not to have all the answers, but to be with someone and give them some support. Excuse me. We do a lot of work with people like Cruise and other charities that support bereaved families. And of course, hospices, remember, provide an enormous amount of support for bereaved families. 70,000 families a year receive bereavement support through their hospice. So it's a really, really important part of our work. It's not one of the Dying Matters asks, so there's always a danger of being dropped, which is why it's important to have a leaflet about grief. And then the last two are the general purpose leaflets again, but with specific audiences in mind, talking to children about death. Children are surprisingly open to talk about death and dying as long as you approach it on their terms and take the opportunities that arise. Don't shut the conversation down when it comes. There's a leaflet about that. And then finally, talk about death to people with dementia. A lot of us, even in the sector, but the general public as a whole, forget dementia is a life-limiting condition. And people with a dementia have just as much right as anyone else to have conversations that they can understand and participate in about their end-of-life care wishes, about wills and funerals and the rest of it, and all the support that they need and deserve. Just because someone is showing signs of dementia doesn't mean that we're losing interest in them. So it's an important part of that. But as I said, we want to know, is this enough? Is there anything missing? Is there anything superfluous? We want to make sure that it works for you. So as this year's campaign gets underway and your plans and preparations get underway, do tell us what works and what doesn't. We'll be asking the people who aren't here as well. But it's really important for us to know that we're doing stuff that helps you. Moving on, the other thing now is we have a different way of getting hold of the leaflets. In the past, colleagues would take over one of the rooms for a couple of months and unload all the boxes from the storehouse where they were and count out bundles of leaflets and send them to people in response to the orders that you paid for, and they'd come out. And it worked because we had a huge stock of printed materials from the early years of Dying Matters, which we were gradually working our way through. But it was costly for the people putting on events because we had to charge for it. We had to at least cover our costs. We didn't make money off it, but we at least had to cover the costs. It took an enormous amount of staff time. It took an entire building out of Hospice House, which was very unpopular with our colleagues as well, and took an entire room out. And so we wanted to try something different. We've run out of the stock anyway, so we want to try a different approach for this year going forwards. We want something that's more flexible. The old method was rather inflexible because you had to order in a minimum number of 50 and then in multiples of 50. So if you knew you were putting on a small event with a small expected turnout, you only wanted 20 leaflets, tough, we had to sell you 50. So it wasn't very flexible, it was quite unresponsive, and of course there was a delay, between placing the order and us being able to turn around and get it back to you. It was quite a lengthy process, very time consuming on our part, costly on your end. So we've scrapped all that, it's going to be completely different now, and so what we're going to do now is all of the leaflets, so you've got the samples in front of you there. All of the leaflets will be available from the beginning of next week, and we'll send you the link in an email, links to all the other resources as well as the slides and everything from today, for you to download the PDFs and print it yourself. And you can print as many as you need, you can print the ones you need, it's entirely in your control. We've designed them, as you can see, particularly compared to the old ones, to be print friendly, so they haven't got lots of photographs in, they haven't got big blocks of colour, they're going to use up all your ink if you are printing at home or in the office. They're designed to be simple to print. They're A5, with the old ones were a CL roll fold and all the rest of it. It was more complex, so it's quite simple for you to do. If you're printing at home or in the office, that's absolutely fine. You can print them out, staple them in the corner. They print at A5, so you could do 2 on a sheet, cut it and staple it. If you want to do a large print version, just print it at A4. So trying to be flexible for you. Once you get to about 30 or more copies, it may well be printed cheaper per copy for you to get it printed professionally. So if you're doing that, again, the PDFs, the printer-ready PDFs will be available for you to download, and all of this is free in terms of getting the PDFs. Obviously, you've got to pay for your printing costs, but it puts you in charge of that. So if you're getting it printed professionally, then you are looking for, this is the technical terminology, you want about 150 gram per square meter, or GSM, paper. And as I say, we'll send links to all this, it'll be on the website. And a silk finish is probably the right finish. Now, you can talk to your printer, they might have different things. If you're part of a larger organisation, there's a lot of leaflet printing, there may be a standard paper stock that your organisation uses, in which case, fine, use that. You don't want it to be too light a stock, or it'll feel flimsy, too heavy, and it starts to feel a bit like a upmarket estate agent's brochure. So 150 is about right in the middle. You can maybe go slightly higher than that. And as I said, once you, the maths of it works out that once you're at about 30 copies or more, it probably is cheaper. Obviously, it's fractionally longer to get it printed professionally. But again, that's up to you. Your organisation, if you do a lot of printing, may well have contracts or in-house services that you can make use of. But it's about making it flexible to you. You can print just what you want, and essentially it's ready immediately. It gives you more control over the cost and the timing. The one thing we lose is knowing where and how many orders have been placed for resources. So we're just relying on the fact that we'll still be able to track the downloads. Will give us an indication of which leaflets are more popular, but we won't know what you've done with it. So after the Awareness Week, we will be writing to say, what have you done with it? And please tell us when that time comes. So it's about flexible. We will also make available what they call an empty belly poster. So a poster with the Dying Matters logo and stuff about the theme, but then a gap in the middle for you to put details of your local event. We'll make that available, again, for you to add your event details and to get it printed, and also a social media card, which similarly, with Dying Matters logo, but there'll be space for your logo and your event info, and then you can share that on social media to promote your things. We will be, so the details of those, we haven't fortunately finished the design of those yet, so I can't show them to you today, but we will be emailing out details of that, which also reminds me to say, please make sure you are signed up for the Dying Matters email list. You'll find a link on the website. It's free. You get about one newsletter a month, but you get slightly more than that in the run-up to the Awareness Week. But that's where this information will be sent out first. So if you are signed up, great. Continue to be so, but if you are not, this is your opportunity to stay in touch that way. How are we doing for time? We're okay. So that's the leaflets. If you have any questions, come and grab me over lunch. Media. There are two parts of the media plans, national and local. I'm going to talk first of all about the national stuff, which we'll be doing, and then we'll talk about the local stuff that you can do. The last few years have been quite tricky for charities trying to get national media coverage. There have been other events happening in the news which have made it quite difficult to cut through. But local news is still a very, very good area, and there's a lot of good opportunity there. We seek to gain national media coverage for Dying Matters Awareness Week primarily to support the local events that are taking place. It's obviously extremely gratifying if we can get Tracy on the sofa of Breakfast TV or Sarah quoted in the Telegraph, or it doesn't matter where. But that's not the main reason we're doing it. We want to do it so that if a member of the public has seen some mention of Dying Matters in their national newspaper, on the radio, on Breakfast TV, and then later that day they're walking past your event or they see a post for your event, they are just that little bit more aware, warmed up to then come along to your event. It can be quite a tricky thing. You know, we don't like talking about death. It is a taboo. That's why we're here campaigning about it. And if people are just a bit more familiar, it's easier for them to come to your event. That's why we're trying to get national media coverage for the week itself. It's extremely gratifying, but really we're trying to do it to then support the stuff that happens locally, which is why last year was difficult. We got a bit. We got 5 Live, and in the Telegraph covered it. We didn't get as much coverage as we'd like. What we're doing is we are doing opinion polling with Comrades Savanta, as they are now called. We've done it with them in the past. We asked some questions of the public around issues to do with death and dying, and this year particularly stuff that ties in with the theme of listening. What we're doing differently this year is normally we do the polling in April, early April, so we've got the data in late April, and then we try and get a big splash story in May for the Awareness Week. This year, we're asking the questions now, and we should have the results first week in February, so that we've got longer to work with it, and we'll try and sell in some feature stories In that period, we'll want some case studies, so we may well be asking you for case studies of stuff that's happened in the past, about why talking is important, about why listening to talk about dying is important, but then backed up with the data, and hopefully that will give us some national coverage. That way, we'll hold some of the data back to try and get a splash for the Awareness Week itself, and we hope this sort of two-pronged approach will try and help us break through the rather difficult media landscape at the moment and get some coverage for the week itself. We hope it'll work. We'll see. But if we want to talk about your media opportunities, this is a map of where there was local media coverage of Dying Matters activities in 2019. So as you can see, it's pretty much across the whole country, which is great. It was over 400 items in the end of Dying Matters coverage, with a theoretical reach of over 80 million people, which means in practice some people will have seen it more than once in their area, which is great. It's absolutely brilliant that people were able to get that. It's doable. The key to it for working with local media is preparation. Think about, what's the story here? What's unusual? Luckily, there is an old journalism saying, dog bites man isn't news, but man bites dog is. The good news, in an odd kind of way, about Dying Matters is because talking about death is a taboo subject, that an event that seeks to talk about death is immediately a man bites dog kind of story. So you're already halfway there. It's about working about what then particular is going to hook into your local media. Are you looking to get coverage for an event before it happens, or are you looking to get coverage of the event after it's happened, sort of report on what happens? It's hard to get both, so you've got to try and work out what you're aiming for, and that affects also how you then pitch it to the journalist. So start thinking now. What's your event? What's the news? What are you doing that's unusual? And talking about death is most of the unusualness taken care of, so you're already well underway. I want to give some worked examples of how to work through your local newspapers. There are a lot of local newspapers in Britain. We are very, very richly served by local media in this country. To avoid any accusations of favouritism, I'm going to start with my hometown newspaper, which is the Lancashire Telegraph, there in Blackburn. And if we look here, it's read by, according to their own figures, over 90,000 people. Now, the total population of Blackburn and its environs is under 200,000 people. So a lot of people read their local newspaper. A lot of people listen to their local radio station. A lot of people watch their local TV regional coverage. It's local media is really, 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 really popular. If you added up all the BBC local radio stations, it's, after Radio 1, the second most popular radio station in the UK. So there's lots and lots of work to be done there, and lots of opportunities. Again, you don't need to look too much at this. This is a typical news spread from a local newspaper. The thing to note, which we will come on to talk about later, is all of the big stories have photos. None of the small stories have photos. So if you want your story to be a big story, you've got to start thinking about the photo that's going to go with it. And we'll look at some examples in a bit. But it has to have a photo. And for news websites, all of the stories have photos, even the short ones. So no photo, no story. But how do you get hold of your news? Well, luckily, newspapers in particular are very, very keen to get coverage. So underneath this charming headline of Chubby Date, you will see that if you're in the Darwin area, then Stephanie Braun is keen to receive your stories. Another spread here, if you look at the bylines of the newspaper, underneath the byline, it's got the email address of the journalist. Sometimes it's a Twitter handle for the journalist. They want you to send them stories. They are keen for it. If you can't find it under the byline of this thing, look on the letters page where there will be a masthead for the newspaper as a whole. That will have the contact details and an email address. Usually you want the news desk. They are keen. They want your stories. I was a journalist for over a decade, so I can say this honestly to my brothers and sisters in the profession. Journalists are busy and will take a shortcut if you offer it to them. So the trick is, provide them with all the information they need to make a story, and you're more like, the less work they have to do. I'm not saying they're lazy, I'm saying they're busy. But the less work they have to do, the more likely you are to get some coverage. So make your story as ready to go as possible. What's the photo? What's the news hook? Who's providing the quote? When does it need to be submitted? How long does it roughly need to be? If you go back to that spread, most of those stories, even the big stories, are 200 to 300 words. Only a front page story is likely to be 500, 800 words in a local newspaper. So again, think about that. Don't send them an essay of 12 pages. It's got to be about the sort of length they're going to want to run. We will produce a press release template for you to use in the run-up to the Awareness Week. Again, sign up to the mailing list because we will send the information out for that. That will probably be available March, April time, but it gives you then time to it'll contain some quotes from Tracy about how important Dying Matters is. We can't obviously release the polling data because of the embargo issues, but we'll put some stuff together for you. Use that as freely as you want to get your own stuff going. There's also radio. Again, this is BBC Radio Lancashire, which is also based in Blackburn. They are equally keen for people to pitch them stories. All the contact details are there. Let's have a quick look at some examples, and then we'll go and get some lunch. So here's one, I have to say shamefacedly. So this is dated from just the other week, and this is a new event in Bristol, which we're very pleased about. They're getting media coverage for Dying Matters Awareness Week already. Even I haven't managed to do that yet, so I'm slightly shamefaced about this, but there you go. They've got coverage for that. Similarly, this is from last December. Hospice in Wrexham is already getting coverage in its local paper for their plans for Dying Matters Awareness Week next May. And the story is not much more than, we will be doing something with Dying Matters Awareness Week. The theme is dying to be heard. That's pretty much the whole story. So it's a combination of, lucky timing. The newspaper had a bit of a gap, and it's an unusual story because it's a man bites dog story. Why would people want to talk about death? Because it's important, but it gets you in the paper. So their makers look bad because they've already managed to get coverage, but it is a really good example. It shows that it can be done. Here's a nice one from last May's Awareness Week. So this is Sobel House in Oxford. Again, looking at the photo, nice smiley person, talk about the fact that actually talk about death isn't a grim subject. This next one, this is a very bad photo. This is a terrible photo, yet it's still a photo, so it got used. It's a rather grey, overcast day outside a funeral director's, and there's someone cycling on the pavement. It's a very, very poor image, but the story would not have run without that poor image. So even a bad image is better than nothing. But you can do better than this. I have confidence in you. You can all do better than this. But it got coverage. It's in the local paper, so well done. That's down in Barnstaple. Here's a nice picture. It's someone decorating a coffin. That is not a usual activity for most people. So again, it's a good photo because it catches the eye. Why are they decorating a coffin? Well, it's Dying Matters Awareness Week. We want to talk about death. And you're off and running. This one is probably the best of them all because it's someone doing a Dying Matters activity. So this is the mayor of Littlehampton in his chain office, writing on his Before I Die board in the town centre, and that's just fantastic. That's absolutely brilliant. So there we are. It's someone doing Dying Matters stuff, and even the photo, the Before I Die. Okay, what would you like to do before you die? So even that, the story itself is getting people talking. You can imagine people passing the paper across and going, well, what would you do? And if you're a hospital or a hospice, if all else fails, find a nurse. Local newspapers love pictures of nurses. Now, we're really keen to get people away from the idea that palliative care and hospice care only involves nurses and no one else, because actually we know it involves a lot of other people as well. And that was the thing of last year's Hospice Care Week. But you know what? If it works, it works. So if in doubt, nurse. If you've got access to one, and it's got to be nurse in uniform, obviously, So you don't need to take the photo. Some newspapers are going to send a local photographer, but even if you're not taking the photo, you need to think about what the photo opportunity is, what the story is, and think about the framing. We're talking about death, but these aren't grim events. For those of you who've been to Dying Matters events, there's a lot of laughter, there's a lot of emotions as well, but if you go to a death cafe or a grave talk session, things like that, talk about death is one of the ways in which we also feel very, very alive. So the way you frame the story, it's not, it's this miserable thing where we're going to talk about death, but actually it's an amazing opportunity for those who want to, for those 2/3 of people who say they're already comfortable talking about it, to actually come together, break the taboo and talk about it. Other thing very quickly, because it is lunchtime. So, and this is the other, when I was putting these slides together, these were the other leading stories on the Lancashire Telegraph website, which I'll So, Mum's eye-catching jewellery. People might want to work on that story. But the other one is about assaults. A Topshop in Blackburn is closing, which is very sad. Someone has died. A woman has been caught defecating on a pavement on CCTV. And a driver is in intensive care. If you were a journalist, would you rather work on one of those or a story about a death cafe? Because maybe the jewellery one, but otherwise I think people would probably write an odd story about these people who want to get together and talk death than one of those stories. So I'm not saying it's guaranteed to work. The only way to find out if it's going to work is to try it. It won't work every time, but you have to give it a go. I'd say we'll have the release template with some other notes, giving some advice. And then very, very finally, because it is lunchtime now, this is a map showing all of the registered Dying Matters events we had in 2019, and I say the word registered. We only know an event takes place if you register it on the website. The advantage to you is it then generates a page on the website about the event, you appear on the map, and it's easier for people to find your event. The advantage for us is we know what's happening and where. We can only talk to people, we can only brag to the press and to politicians and the rest of it about how big Dying Matters is if people register events. So please, when you put it on, go to the website, it takes you about 5 minutes to fill in to register. It's free, it helps promote your event, it helps us, and above all, it helps the people who are going to find the events, the ones who are dying to be heard. Thank you.